Once again, the truck owners paralyzed the world's longest and thinnest country. Shops closed for lack of goods. Hunger stalked the streets. Middle-class housewives came out to bang their pots and pans in protest. The violent right laid their plots.
Certainly the situation was getting more and more ominous. And then we did have the possibility of learning something about it, not because we were in touch with the coup plotters. We were not.
Just after midday on Tuesday, the 11th of September, under orders from General Pinochet, British-made Hunter jets swooped over the Moneda presidential palace, starting fires which were to burn for weeks.
My wife and our children were at the house, and they had a marvelous view of these planes winging over and then dipping down and sending their bombs into the Moneda.
That morning from the Moneda, Allende had broadcast to the nation.
Trabajadores de mi patria, tengo fe en Chile y su destino. Sigan ustedes sabiendo que mucho más temprano que tarde, de nuevo abrirán las grandes alamedas por donde pase el hombre libre para construir una sociedad mejor. ¡Viva Chile! ¡Viva el pueblo! ¡Vivan los trabajadores!
Hours later, Allende was dead.
He always said that he wouldn't be taken alive, that he would die defending the Constitution. He kept his word.
General Pinochet immediately stamped his mark on the country. In the capital, suspects were rounded up into the National Stadium. Many, like folk singer Victor Jara, were never seen alive again.
I know that he behaved with great moral courage. I know that he was a sort of source of strength to his fellow prisoners. I know that he sang there. I know that they beat him down. I know that they broke his hands or his wrists. And I know that after 2 days, they killed him off.
Muchos no volvieron, tampoco Manuel.
The people he got rid of and shot out of the stadium were all bad people. I mean, he was smart enough to know if he was going to do it, you had to do it complete 100%. You just can't go into it half-assed, and do a little bit here, a little bit there. He went in with a lot of force and did it, and straightened it out.
When he entered the White House in January 1977, Jimmy Carter promised a new U.S. attitude to the rest of the world.
I announced that human rights would be a cornerstone or a foundation of our entire foreign policy. So I officially designated every U.S. ambassador on earth to be my personal human rights representative.
In Nicaragua, U.S. ambassadors were used to a different role. In the 1930s, U.S. Marines had put the tyrant Tacho Somoza in power. More than 40 years later, Nicaragua was still ruled by a Somoza. A politically moderate newspaper owner, Pedro Joaquin Chamorro, dared to challenge the dictatorship.
So what happened to this person who wanted freedom? Well, they murdered him. Who murdered him? The Somoza forces.
Chamorro's murder electrified the cowed people of Nicaragua. Somoza declared a state of siege. The U.S. woke up to popular anger against the super-rich family which had been its ally for more than 4 decades.
I have been fighting the East-West ideological war since the inception of Fidel Castro. So we've been under the attack of that Cuban government for almost 18 years.
From the hills, where they had been secretly training for years, guerrillas emerged who proudly bore the name of the 1930s anti-Yankee rebel, Sandino. But in the town of Esteli, Somoza's World War II US tanks carried the day. "2,000 people died in what became a dead city. The Sandinistas regrouped, pitting their rifles against Somoza's might.
The front now entered the cities and knocked on the door of the capital for the first time in its history.
The Sandinistas' will to win triumphed. Managua went mad with joy. Jimmy Carter had left it very late before abandoning the Somozas and accepting the new Sandinista government.
I said to Carter, the United States had to make good the historical damage they had inflicted on our country. Our party hymn still includes the words, Yankee, the enemy of humanity. We said to him that the only way to abolish that line would be for the attitude of the imperialist powers to change throughout the world.
The US would not be lectured to. The tide of conservatism, which was to bring Ronald Reagan to power, was rising. In Nicaragua, Somoza's land was shared out and the family's business monopolies were taken over. Education and healthcare became widely available. But not everyone was happy with the revolution.
All those who didn't agree with the Sandinista policies were subjected to confiscations and imprisonment. Their lives were threatened. Many were murdered just for disagreeing with the Sandinista front. This sort of thing turned many Nicaraguan peasants against the Sandinistas.
In the shadows, opponents of the revolution plotted their revenge. Inexperienced Sandinista guerrillas struggled to run a war-torn country.
What we asked for was weapons so that we could defend ourselves. That's what we asked of the Soviet Union, of the socialist countries of Eastern Europe, of the Algerians, of the Vietnamese.
We sent light weapons, helicopters, armored cars, and other military equipment. There wasn't a large Soviet military presence, but they did have Cuban advisors.
Throughout Central America, protest mounted against right-wing military rule. In El Salvador, the Catholic Church had become a haven for the oppressed. On the concrete steps of the cathedral in San Salvador, the military decreed that demonstrators for human rights should be discouraged. Nothing very new for El Salvador. In a massacre in 1932, the military had killed up to 40,000 people. In 1979, the cameras were on hand to record the color of the blood. Archbishop Oscar Romero was the cautious leader of Salvadorian Catholics. When he spoke out, the reaction from the right was immediate.
During the last months, the letterbox at the seminary where he had his office was full of anonymous letters practically every day, with death squad emblems on them. There was one death squad called the White Hand. There were many letters written on black paper with the white hand saying, "We are going to kill you. We are going to tear you apart."
Todo quedaría resuelto en El Salvador. No habría necesidad de enfrentamientos ni de otras soluciones. La solución es esta: convertirse de corazón todos al Señor.
In March 1980, as he was saying Mass in a private chapel, the Archbishop was murdered by a single assassin's bullet. At his funeral, the military struck again.
I only remember a bomb exploding, and then many shots being fired, and people running in all directions. It was a disaster. People running, knocking each other down, being hit by bullets. Many, many people were killed.
El hecho de que el arzobispo de San Salvador
The fact that